So this is One Book, One Bronx. We are a discussion group. As I always say, this is your discussion group. You make this discussion group important and vibrant. Without your input and your questions and suggestions, we're just hanging out looking at each other. So, so I always appreciate everyone who comes into this space, whether it is just to hang out and listen, or you come into this space to actively participate and ask questions. Is deeply appreciated. So thank you again. Our partner for this book is Casita Maria Center for Arts and Education. They have been almost since we've started, back in the good old days when we met in person, we were partnering with them. We've continued online. We're continuing with this book, A Woman of Endurance by Dahlma Llanos-Figueroa. And Aisha Foreman. Foreman is your last name, is that correct?
Janor, Aisha Janor.
Janor, all right, thank you. She is here. You think I would know her last name by now? But she's here to say a few words about Casita and all the great work that they're doing.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Again, my name is Aisha Janor. I am the creative arts manager at Casita. And so that really focused on all the programming side of things to open it up for the South Bronx. All of our program is free and open to the public. I do want to just say thank you for everyone that's being here, and thank you for the author for joining us tonight. It's very special to have that, to be able to share that with the audience that we're trying to serve in the South Bronx and everywhere else too, where people are at right now. I did want to share some programming that is happening at Casita this fall and winter. We have our gallery that's going to be remaining open until the spring. It has a exhibit called Built Like This. It's focused around literacy. It's comic book theme, and it is about a young girl who's dealing with her body image. And then everyone is welcome to come invite others to come as well. I'll leave the email in the chat so you guys can send out any information on that. And then we have our third annual Paranda next month, November 30th, which is going to be all full of joy, cheer, holiday preseason happiness. It's going to have free performances. It's going to be all Christmas theme, and it will be located in 878 Tiffany Street and walking around the Southern Boulevard up until Urban Health Plan, and then coming back to 8787 Tiffany Street at 3 p.m. I'll leave the link for that information as well. And again, I just want to say thank you for everyone that's here. And hopefully you guys can join us for the next book club session starting in November 22nd. I won't be there because I'm expecting a baby in about a week and a couple of days. But Gail, the interim co-executive director of Casita, will be there, and of course Ron and the facilitator. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Aisha. We just want to send Aisha and her family well wishes. She's going to give birth to a new reader soon, so we've had a couple of babies born during the book, not actually during the book club, but while they were members of the book club. So we appreciate that. We appreciate, of course, you being one of our partners, but also the fact that we know that you're going to bring a reader into the world, and there's nothing better than that. So,
or maybe a writer.
Or a writer. There you go.
Exactly.
So we're going to move on. I just also wanted to acknowledge that Evelyn is here, Evelyn Loriano. I know you were in Puerto Rico during and may still be in Puerto Rico. So just wanted to make sure you're safe and sound and you're here with us. So we appreciate, you still sort of stay in commitment to this space. So in considering everything that's going on in Puerto Rico. Dahlma is here. I don't know if anybody wants to jump in. Dahlma, do you have a few words or anything you want say before we just sort of jump in with questions and things like that?
I just want to thank everybody for coming and for sharing this time in this space with us. The Caribbean right now is heavily on my mind, with all the islands being affected by the climate as well as the southern United States. But of course, the Caribbean is my first love. So I've been thinking about them a lot. But I'm ready to take questions and hear commentary and just get your feedback on what you thought of the book.
So thank you. So I would say you should describe the book, but we all know what the book is about by now. So I'll start it off. I remember, so we hosted you a couple of years ago. We read Daughters of the Stone. And you said that out of that book, you hope to, I think, create or write 5 additional books, or some, this would be like maybe not a series, but like a sort of a grouping of books set in Puerto Rico, starting in pre-post-slavery times. And I just wanted to know, is this the first book out of that series?
Right. The series or related books will be either 4 or 5 in total. And A Woman of Endurance is the second in the series. The main character, Pola, is introduced in the first book, Daughters of the Stone. And then I really felt that I wanted to give her her own story. So A Woman of Endurance is her own story.
Okay. Thank you. And I also want to let everyone know you can just ask questions. If you want to raise your hand, you can, but just try not to speak over anyone. You can just unmute yourself first and just ask a question if you like. I will.
Oh, we have the chat room also. So
yeah, so you can also place your questions in the chat, and I'll read those questions. One of the things that I thought was interesting, and I wouldn't say I was misled, but I was going down a different path. I thought Chachita was in Pola's imagination, and it turns out she was actually, a young girl, living in the woods. Was that intentional, or did I just sort of lead myself down a path that it really wasn't there?
it was not intentional. However, that would have made a really good book too. Had she been a spirit child or and it would have made sense. I can understand why you might think that.
Because for a long time, it was just the two, together. Anytime Pola would see Chachita, it would just be those two together until that scene kind of near the end. And then Yamaya appears also. I don't want to go too far ahead, but which made me really think, but then it's clear that Chachita is not a spirit child. Yeah. We have any questions? Tiffany, then Francis.
Hi, everybody.
Hi, Tiffany.
Hi, Dahlma. I thought this book was a masterpiece.
Oh my.
I loved it. I was looking at the cover and I didn't get it until the very end of the book. And my question, at first I was like, that's a really attractive woman on the cover. And I was like, but they keep saying that Pola is unattractive. But when you think about it, the angle of the woman's face on the cover is such that you don't really see her face on. So she could be missing teeth and she could have a scar straight down her face, just like it says in the book. But my question is, in the last book club, I looked at the scarring on her in the mirror and I said, that's the guy from the Civil War, and it was Whipped Peter. So I'm curious, were you influenced by that photo? And then how does that relate to Pola?
I wasn't influenced by that photo. I knew that photo, but it wasn't on my mind when I wrote the book. The reason I picked this cover, by the way, the artist is Fabiola Jean-Louis, who is a Haitian paper sculptor and photographer and painter. And the woman in the book is actually wearing one of Fabiola's paper dresses. But
Oh, it's paper.
yes, it's paper. But one of the reasons that why this cover was really important to me is because if you look at her dress, she's all dressed up and it's a beautiful dress. But if you look at the back of the dress, the lace looks like scarring, like the same scarring that the man in Bullwhip Days has on his back. So that's kind of a mirror image and attachment from the present to the past. Also, I feel that no matter how well we are doing, no matter how much material wealth we may accrue, there are scars that are never healed. And the more people say there's no racism, the more the scars burn. And so that scar on the back of her dress can represent many things because there are many different kinds of scars in the book. But it also could represent the scar that we carry in our soul for hurts that have never been healed. And that could be any kind of hurt. In her case, we know what the hurt is, but many people are walking around with scars that haven't healed, no matter what they may project. So I thought that was an important message for the book.
Francis?
Hi, thank you, Dahlma, for being with us tonight. It's been a pleasure being a part of this book club with everyone and having this opportunity to speak to you. I was very curious about the type of research that went into the book. Growing up here in the United States, we've learned a lot, or if we've made the effort to have learned a lot about slavery here in the stateside. And while growing up as a New Rican, we were aware of slavery in Puerto Rico. There wasn't as much detail into the institution and how it happened. So I was wondering what the research went into it, because it really was eye-opening.
Right. I did several different kinds of research. I started with the traditional type of research where you go to primary sources in a library or some repository of historical documents. What I found is that those documents were written by the owners, by the conquerors, by the people who held the power. And that's not the story I wanted to tell. The story I wanted to tell was the story of the Africans. And so I had to look for other ways. So my husband and I went to Puerto Rico repeatedly, maybe 8 or 9 trips over the years. And we talked to the oldest people we could find. And we asked them about stories that their grandfathers and great-grandfathers had told them, family stories, because those oral histories were more important to me for what I wanted to do than the story that the slave owners were telling me. There was not a lot of information about the Black community and Black history in Puerto Rico up until the 1970s is when I first became aware of there being scholarly research. And that was very limited. There wasn't that much. Now there's more research being done with the whole Afrodescendiente movement and the Afro-Boricua insistence on their contributions. But back then there wasn't a whole lot. So there was the traditional one, which didn't help a lot. Then there was the oral history. And then I just started going to plantations, restored plantations and plantation ruins, and finding scholars in Puerto Rico and architects and archaeologists and all these people who I went to get information from. And so the research process was wide ranging and constantly changing. Right now, I'm putting on Facebook all the books that I am reading now for the third book that I am. So for example, there's a book called Women in San Juan, right? And it talks about a lot of the Black women who, after emancipation, became vendors, like street vendors. They would sell alcapurrias and they would sell things that they could make to help support the family. And so find out, where did they live? What communities did they have? How did La Perla start? What kinds of businesses were in Calle Luna, Calle Sol, places that now are developed and gentrified, but at the time were Black communities. Much like here in New York City, there are Black communities that have disappeared because they were demolished to build Central Park or Lincoln Center or whatever. So the same thing happened in Puerto Rico, so I had to excavate those things. And then some research was like research into finding out about herbs. Like my grandmother used to grow all these herbs. I never paid attention. But so now as an adult, I have to go buy books on herbs to see what you use these herbs for. And so I had to find a baby book on African names because I didn't know what, those would be. So all of those are types of research. Thank you for asking. It was a lot of work.
Is there a unique love that you have, or is this specific to research about needlework? I noticed that in both your novels, needlework tends to be the work that the enslaved women do. And I just wanted to know whether that was like something that's close to your heart or something that's historically more accurate.
Right. As a child, a very young child, my mother would sit with me and teach me how to crochet and how to embroider. And my grandmother was a seamstress. So needlework has always been part of my family and myself. Even, I mean, during COVID, needlework saved my life because while I was in the house, I was knitting a sweater every month or embroidering something for my husband. So keeping my hands busy was always important, and creating something that someone can use is always important. So I make a lot of stuff. I give it to my friends, and I feel like I'm in the house with them. So it is important for me. It's important in the books because these women were artisans. Their value increased because of their ability to create these beautiful dresses for these white women all over the neighborhood. So in a sense, that gave them a certain amount of protection, excuse me, because it keeps them out of the field. And that's a big thing for Pola, because she used to be a field hand.
Right.
And now she's allowed to sit up at the house with the house workers. So that's very important. So I think that, yes, it will always be a part of it. It also gave them the ability to dress themselves better than what they would have been otherwise. Because you know how things go. You're working for someone else, you ask them for more material than what you really need, and what's left over is yours to do it as you want. And that became part of the story. So at the end of the book, when they're getting ready for a wedding, some people might say, well, where did slaves get all this beautiful fabric and all this? Well, they've been saving up all the leftover fabric and threads and decorations that for the customers, it's nothing, but for them, it allows them to dress themselves.
I think the book starts with one of the characters trying to look for extra food, but there's nothing, like in the kitchen, but there's nothing there. Paula has a question that's really, I'm going to read Paula's, then I'll read Tiffany's question. I was struck by the presence of knotting, unknotting, and knitting in the novel as a metaphor, often between Simon and Pola. Was that a connection also?
Absolutely. Simon is a maker of knots and an unmaker of knots, right? So his relationship with Pola is so complex and tied up, and Pola herself is such a tight knot that he really has to work at loosening her up enough for her to see him standing there.
Yeah.
Because she has been abused for so long that she's not going to trust any man. Yeah. So Simon is an incredibly patient and loving man who recognizes her needs and puts them ahead of his needs, because he could have just as easily said, you know what, this woman is too much trouble, let me move on. But that's not what he did. Yeah. What he did was he figured out how to get around her defenses so that he could find the tender part of her.
But he almost—
Simon is a really important character. So many readers and so many of my friends have said, does he have a younger brother? Is somebody around today? Because he is such a strong and loving personage. In the past, people have said, well, your stories are all women's stories. Where are the men? Well, the men have always been there. They haven't been center stage. But in this case, Simon just took over. And he said, I'm going to tell my story directly to the reader and you stay out. And that's what I did. And it worked out very well. And so I'm really glad that he's one of my favorite characters as well.
Thank you for that thoughtful answer. Tiffany has a question. Were the plantations in Puerto Rico working farms, or are they museums and places that have weddings like here?
I'm sorry, who asked that? Tiffany?
I did.
Yeah. Okay, you're talking about today?
Yeah, when you went to visit.
Some of them are kept as places of patrimony or museums. They're kept so that people could see what it was like way back then. I don't know of people having weddings at any of them. I never asked about that. They do, each of the ones that are restored do have libraries and material that you can buy, little informational pamphlets and stuff, so that, for instance, in one plantation I went to, I found out from the booklet that I didn't find out that they had breeding farms. Nowhere did I find that information. However, I did find that in one plantation, at least, they went from having almost all male workers to almost all female workers. Now, this is a sugarcane plantation. What exactly were these women producing, right? Since women did work in the cane, but you really need men, strong men, to be able to cut sugarcane on the level that you would need in order to make it a viable business. So that question was never answered. I kept asking, where are these women working at? But I didn't get an answer. And speaking of women working, Ron, going back to your question about needlework, that tradition of working fabric and working threads and doing needle work has carried down over the centuries to the point that in the 1930s through the 1950s, when there was the huge Puerto Rican migration to New York City, those Puerto Rican women joined the Ladies Garment Workers Union, and they were a huge part of the Ladies Garment Workers Union. And they brought their skills with them. You know, they weren't paid as much as they should have. That's another issue. But their skills were needed in order for the manufacturing of clothing in New York to function. And I think that up until they started sending all our stuff overseas to be done, those ladies maintained that industry, and they don't get enough credit for that, I don't think.
Going back to a answer you just gave, what do you think happened on that plantation where all the men were replaced by women? Like, what could you surmise happened? Was it economic? Was it capitalism that kind of shifted?
Well, one of the things that happened was that the sugar, the price of sugar dropped. There was a lot more sugar coming from Cuba, from Jamaica, from some of the other islands, from Brazil, and from southern United States, from Florida and other southern states. And so there was now a surplus of sugar, so the prices dropped. And Puerto Rico is a tiny island compared to these other sugar manufacturing places. And so that's why a lot of plantation owners sent their workers, especially their artisans, into town, and they became urban slaves. And the owners still got the money, but they gave them a certain amount of money to live on in the towns. So that's why Simon, for instance, he isn't sent into town, but he's moved from sugarcane to furniture making and using his skills to weave for caning for the furniture for the people of the community. So I think that's part of it. But I think the fact that that shift happened on that plantation gave me a perfect opportunity to tell my story about women used as breeders and plantations that were set up specifically for breeding women, because the European heads of state had decided they didn't want them to bring any more slaves from Africa, because they had too many revolutions. They had the Haitian Revolution that scared the hell out of them. And so they didn't want all these Africans coming. They wanted people who were born to slavery that didn't remember being free. And so they passed these laws where you couldn't bring any more slaves from Africa. I'm sorry?
Today, right?
You can continue. Somebody didn't mute themselves.
Okay. The same thing happened in the United States. In Virginia, we had breeding farms, they call them. In Aruba, there were breeding farms. In Aruba, it was so specific that they even figured out how much food to give to pregnant women to make sure that they would produce a healthy baby, because the last thing they needed was an unhealthy baby. So they had to give them more food and provide more care for them, at least until they delivered their child. The child was then taken away and they were sent back into the fields. Pretty much like a brooding mare or a cow or an animal. There was no difference.
Evelyn has a question. Could you tell us more about Leticia La Loca and what inspired you?
That's a good question. I wanted this book to be, you know how most slave narratives, they talk about the white people and the Black people are kind of incidental. They're in the background and they're all pretty much the same. They're interchangeable, no big thing. I wanted this book to be about the Black characters, and the whites were incidental and on the side. So I wanted to show that there are all different kinds of people in this Black community on this plantation, just like we have all different kinds of people in our society, right? So there are people who protect, people who nurture, people who defend. There are also people who attack, people who rape, people who take advantage, and collaborators. And there are a lot of self-haters. Leticia La Loca really hates the fact that she is a Black woman. And she hates the fact that she has to work in the fields. And so she will attack Pola because she feels like you should be down here with me, you know, as opposed to saying, well, we should all fight to be better than where we are. She's just attacking what she thinks is the weakest link. Although once we read the book, we see that she made a mistake with that one. But yeah, and I called her Leticia La Loca because I think this self-hate that she has is a form of madness. And eventually she does lose her mind when she started wearing the horse tail as her hair.
Yeah.
And when she started betraying other folks so that she could get makeup to make herself look whiter. This is madness as far as I was concerned. So that's where she came from. It's like, you know, Letty done lost her mind, you know.
Except for Leticia, it feels like everyone, all the other enslaved Africans are working together, except for like Romero and his crew and Romero.
And Celestina.
And yeah, Celestina, who's a trick,
Right.
you know, who feels I'm whiter than white people. Why should I have to put up with this, you know?
Yeah.
So yes, I tried to get different different personality types. So there were, for instance, Leticia La Loca was really an extreme, but she had a little posse that was with her up until the time they realized that she was willing to betray anybody to get what she wanted. And then that's it. Everybody turned against her and she was on her own. But I think that there are a number of, for want of a better word, negative or flawed characters in the novel, both white and Black.
Can you
Wait, Ron? I'm sorry, before you change the subject, I just wanted to say in book club, Dahlma, we were saying at first when Leticia was introduced, we felt sorry for her. We were like, oh, you know, she's just a hurt person and hurt people. But then as the, but then as the book went on, we're like, wait a minute, whoa, no, she's trash and she has to go. So nobody felt bad for her at the end.
Right. And then there was a woman I did feel sad for, is, oh my God, I forgot her name. I can't believe this. The woman who was sleeping with the guys to get enough money so she could buy her husband and herself.
La Mula?
I'm sorry?
La Mula?
Yes, yes. They called her La Mula, but she had her name. But you know, and what must it have done to her husband to know that she had to go to this extreme to buy his freedom? And then of course the very tragic couple, Adela and Benito, who escaped just didn't work, and they were caught and punished in the most savage ways.
Yeah.
Yes, Sonia?
Yeah, I have now that you bring that up, I have a question about that punishment, the chapter of the holes. Where did you learn about that? I had never heard about that. I mean, it was devastating. I couldn't read for days after reading that chapter. It took me a while to get back to the book. Where did you learn about that?
Well, the first thing I'll do is I'll share with you that that chapter cost me a lot, and I ended up in the hospital as a result, because I started throwing up and I couldn't stop. I got dehydrated and I had to go into the hospital. To answer your question, the one about the woman being held, put face down and over the hole, is that what the one you were talking about? Actually, that was an oral history. One of my friends told me that her grandfather told her that his father, who owned slaves, that's how he made sure that he could punish pregnant women without damaging the baby. Is just put her belly in a hole and whip her while she's laying down over that hole. And once I heard that story, I couldn't get it out of my mind. The other forms of punishment are, I've read in other books that that people were buried from their neck down and tortured. But what I did not want was, I did not want this book to become a catalog of one torture after another.
Yeah.
Francis, what is that?
It's a cat.
Oh, it's a cat tail. Oh my God. I'm
Yeah.
wondering what that was. I'm sorry.
Enjoyed the book too, because we were doing the audio book, which is very nicely acted, but she got to listen to the
Thanks, Francis. Sandra, do you have a question? You're muted, Sandra. Hang on, you're muted.
Yeah, in talking about the punishment, when the one with that, he dug this hole for both of them, put them in this hole, and then put honey. I never heard of that. And so then that would make the insects just eat them till there was no more. I never even thought of anything like that. Now I know about the whipping and all that, but that was serious. And he had them face each other so they could see each other deteriorate. That is cruel, mean. I can't even think. That's the part I had to put the book down for a minute. Yes.
Yeah. There you go.
Sandra, many readers have said that in several parts they had to put the book down.
Yes.
Because they could not read it anymore. And what I was saying before was, I have read books where it's one torture scene after another, after another, after another, and I had to keep putting the book down, and I had a hard time finishing it. So I had to balance the reality of slavery, which was a brutal and inhumane situation, with the healing. And so the way that I did it was, once I wrote a very hurtful scene like that, then I followed it with Simon. Simon was the balm. He was what took away the pain for a little bit. And then I'd write another difficult scene, and then I'd try and write something comedic, like the fight in the sugarcane field, right? So that I didn't stay there, and so the reader didn't stay there, because we don't need to just read one atrocity after another. We need to recognize that it was there and then move on to see, how did we heal? And this book is all about healing, you know. So
There's a
Can I-
Madeline? Yeah, absolutely.
So I thought you did a really good job with like bringing multi-dimensionalism to all the characters, and it was definitely very poetically written. And I think I wanted to know if you did it on purpose, that the best example of like a nurturing, mature type of love was between two women.
Yeah, I did do that. I did that in the first book as well.
Okay.
I guess because in my life, the most nurturing people have been women. That seems very natural to me, but not just women, but mothering women. So there are older women who are protective, who have lived life and know how to ease her way. So you have three women. You have Tia Josefa, you have Rufina, and you have Pastora. And these three women are kind of like the tantamount to the Catholic Trinity, right? That these three people, they heal her in terms of nurturing with the food, in terms of physically healing her, Rufina, and Tia Josefa, who heals her socially, because she says to her, you can't do this alone. You can't live without a community. You've got to learn how to live among people, recognize who they are, and live among people. And then, of course, Simon is an incredibly healing presence, but he had to go through a whole lot before she let him in enough. He's the last part of the puzzle, right?
Mhm.
She's got to learn to trust. I'm sorry, you said, Madeline?
Oh, which I appreciated, because a person who's been through so much wouldn't have just let him in. There's just no way.
Right, right. In fact, when she first comes out of Rufina's hut, Rufina sits her down on a rock and she moves to under a tree because she doesn't want her back exposed. She wants to know that nobody can come at her when she's not prepared. So even physically, as she moves through the world, she is very fearful and very protective and doesn't really begin to loosen up. But when do you think she begins to loosen up?
Cachita.
Yeah, I don't
Chachita.
think she loosens up before that because she's unwilling to trust other people with her secrets. It's
Mhm.
definitely Chachita. I agree with Sonia.
Mhm.
When she finds someone to mother is when she's
Mhm.
like, all right, I could do some of this. I
Right.
could do this to other people.
And there's no way that Chachita can really hurt her
Mhm.
because she's up in the tree. So she's not even physically near her, right? So she, little by little, she starts coming down from the tree. Little by little, she lets Chachita get closer until Chachita, in a sense, takes the place of all those babies that were taken away from her,
Mhm.
you know? So she becomes a mother, a surrogate mother. But in the book, there are many surrogate mothers. And in our society, we have many surrogate mothers, right? We have godmothers, madrinas, mothers-in-law, well, sometimes, you know, stepmothers. And
Aunties.
we have women who just step in when they see that a child needs mothering, right? Madre de crianza. So I wanted to include all of that. We got Sandra again.
Sandra? Yep, you're muted, Sandra.
Did I answer your question?
Yes, you did.
Okay.
But I'm talking about nurturing. When she went to the one in, I can't remember the name, and she just, when she saw when she was laying down and she thought she was just about gone, but she held her and just rubbed her and gave her love. And that kind of nurtured her back. And then the whole world in her head just opened up because she finally found somebody that she could nurture and love.
Very good. Very good.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Oh, I just wanted to say I'm actually not done with the book, but I have really enjoyed reading it. And I thought you did a really great job of dealing with all of the grief and sadness that these breeding women had. You know, that they could not even see their child or spend 30 seconds with them. And one of the things that came up was how closely tied this was to some scenes in Toni Morrison's Beloved, particularly with the character Baby Suggs, who talks about that same level of loss and she has like 8 or 9 kids, and she won't even look at them. She might look at a foot or a hand. She won't even look at a whole face because she knows she has to give that child up. So I thought you did a great job of dealing with the blues and the sadness and the grief of the mothers through Paula, through Paula and some of the other characters.
Well, thank you. I since you mentioned Toni Morrison, she's one of my, literary godmothers, because much of her philosophy I have adopted. But I think that the experience of slavery, although it might differ from one country to another, in terms of the way that the enslaved people were treated and mistreated and treated in basically as animals, and the ways in which they found to get around that, to cling to their humanity. I think that that's a universal thing among enslaved people all over the Americas. And so this need of protection is especially important because so many women lost their mothers. They were either sold away, or they were killed, or they were just not there. And so I felt that this need for protection is a global human need, and somebody has to be there to provide it. Otherwise, the person becomes very twisted and is stripped of their humanity. And when Pola arrives at this second plantation, she's almost there, almost stripped of her humanity. They have beaten her so badly that she was reacting like an animal, right? When Simon first approaches her, she bites him, even though she's missing, teeth, whatever teeth she has left, she's gonna bite pretty much like a cat or a wild animal. And I wanted to show that shift from that woman to the woman at the end of which you haven't read yet, but the woman at the end of the book. And I hope that you come away feeling the healing that happens at the end of the book, because that's really what I want. That's really my message, that no matter how brutalized these people have been, they managed to survive. We are here. I am here. If it hadn't been for somebody like her, I would not be here. So what kept people going? How did they endure?
Thank you again for that thoughtful answer. Absolutely. Tiffany has a question. The cave where Chachita hid reminded me of the Underground Railroad. Was there an official network in Puerto Rico similar to the Underground Railroad?
Not that I know of to that extent, because it is an island. It's much smaller, but there were ways of getting away, of running away. We had cimarrones, escaped people who set up societies in the mountains. For people who don't know, Puerto Rico has extensive coastal, but it also has a huge mountain range that goes right through the center of the island. And a lot of people escaped and went there. There are also islands off the coast of Puerto Rico that they might have been able to get to. But they weren't thinking about, they just wanted to get away. They didn't know the geography of the whole thing. They just needed to get away. And as you could see from that little conversation between Simon and Rufina, there were escape routes. and no one person knew all the escape routes, because if one person knows them all, that person gets caught and tortured, that's it. All their secrets are gone. So each person, Simon had his escape route. Pastora, who couldn't climb like him, had another escape route that took longer, but she could still get out. So when he couldn't take Pola to Chachita, Rufina took her. So there were systems of escape, probably not as sophisticated as the Underground Railroad, which went all the way, you know, from Florida all the way up to Toronto. But there were escape routes, and there were underground rebellions and underground movements to shelter people who were trying to get away.
Thank you. Sarada asks, Rufina was my favorite character. Was she inspired by a woman in real life?
I would say the person in my life that was closest to Rufina would have been my grandmother, who knew so much about herbs. And she didn't have a lot of faith in doctors until much later in her life, but she felt that everything you needed could be grown. And yeah, I think she's the closest person to her. And like Rufina, she was a country woman who didn't have a whole lot of formal education, but she was one of the wisest women I ever met. I wish she was still around so I could tell her that.
Was there a separate sort of like group of research you had to do around the herbal medicines and remedies?
Yeah, absolutely. And I had to do it sometimes in another language, because most of the material in Puerto Rico was done by the US after the invasion. And so the health department that was set up in Puerto Rico tried to gather that information. But of course they did it in English. So I had to go find Spanish herbal books and sometimes French herbal books, but mostly Spanish herbal books that dealt with the natural world at that time. I also went to, for those of you who live in New York, I also went to botanicas, you know, what's the best way to describe a botanica? It's like an herbal supermarket. And asked modern day healers what they would use for this, that, or the other. And usually botanicas have a little corner with books in it, and you can find all kinds of traditional medicinal herbs and information about that there.
Thank you. Anna Marie has a question. Was there a particular reason why you chose to make Chachita an older girl? Is it because the age would add to her survival tactics?
Absolutely. It had to be a girl who could survive in the forest on her own. And so she was prepubescent. So she was just about entering into womanhood, which is also a point where a young girl needs a woman or a mother most, right? To provide a model for her.
She seemed to be almost a reflection somewhat in her level of trust when she first meets Pola.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. They were both, you know, Chachita was a wild child, right? She was living in the forest by herself and hiding from everyone. And that gave her a lot of the same behavioral characteristics that Pola had. The distrust, the running away, the speed with which she could react to changing situations.
Yes.
Anna Marie?
Yes, thank you. Thank you. And thank you so
Um,
much for joining us today.
Oh,
It's-
absolutely.
It's
I love this
amazing.
book club.
Yeah, but it's amazing to get so much history. It's amazing, and it's almost like a bittersweet because you just have this one opportunity to get so much.
mhm.
Well,
To
did you read Daughters of the Stone?
No, I have not. But
Okay.
now I will.
Okay. And the next one is coming not too far in the future.
Okay, great.
Okay.
I just lost I had a follow-up to Anna. Oh, do you consider these history books?
No.
I mean, not in the sense of a textbook that, you know, you would get in school,
Right.
but a reflection of a time or an era.
Absolutely. I do. And I wanted to tell the story not told. I wanted to give voice to the people who have been denied a voice and face to the people who've been denied a face. And so I tried to stick as much as possible to the social and cultural realities of the time. People like my grandmother were never asked for her opinion or her view on anything. And those women had a lot to say, and we could learn a lot from them. And I felt like I needed to start putting it down.
All right.
I love the proverb that says, every time an elder dies, we lose a library.
Mm-hmm.
And I decided I needed to start writing down stuff so that when I'm gone, you know, my daughters and other young people can say, oh, you know, so that's what happened. And also there are people in Puerto Rico who tell me that as a colony, Puerto Rico Puerto Rican students do not learn Puerto Rican history. They are taught American history.
Mm-hmm.
And so they themselves are yearning to find out what happened. And as is understandable, sometimes elders really don't want to talk about it. There are people in my family who do not want to talk about how in this family, you know, there are the white members and there are the Black members, and how did that happen way back when? And it turns out that the Black members had been the children of the masters, and nobody wanted to talk about where those children came from and why. And so those are some of the reasons that I feel like I have to write this and put it down for people. I think that the way history is taught, it's taught from the outside in. We're taught dates, battles, what happened. That's not what I'm interested in. I'm interested in the inside out. Why? How did people react to these situations? What did it do to people? And so I use history as a framework, but when I have to change something, I have no problem. I move hurricanes decades to suit my characters.
Question.
Yeah, go ahead, Sandra.
Oh, Sandra, you're on a roll now.
I know, because I love this book. I did.
Okay.
I mean, I'm so glad I got a chance I listened to it. I have it in the car. I have it by my bed. I don't want to miss a beat.
Well,
You know,
you.
it took a lot to write this book. How
Yes.
long did it take? You probably said it earlier.
It took me about 4 or 5 years.
Oh, you did a great job. Wait for the next one.
Thank you. It took even longer to sell it, to get somebody to buy it. So that is the nature of things. And after you sell it, it takes 2 years before it hits the public. So my last book I wrote in 2000 was published in 2009. And it wasn't until 2022 that my second book was published. So it takes a long time.
Yeah.
Jeez. Well,
There's
don't give up.
Oh, hell no, girl. I got lots to say. I got lots to say and nobody's gonna stop me from saying it. Yes,
so
Ron.
Madeline in the chat says, at the beginning of the book club, we noted that the English and the Spanish versions of the book have different titles. Endurance in Spanish is more aguantar, forgive me,
Aguantar.
thank you, where the Spanish book title uses indomita, which means cannot be tamed.
Exactly.
Can you tell us more about the title difference?
I didn't want a literal translation. I wanted to reflect the spirit of the book. And I think indomitable is a good word for her. And I loved A Woman of Endurance as well. So when the suggestion came to change it, we tried everything we could to stay as close to A Woman of Endurance, and it just didn't work. So we had to pick one word that summarized this woman's spirit. And I think indomitable, indomita, is a good word for her.
Tiffany has a follow-up question to our earlier conversation. Speaking of herbs, can you talk about the root that Rufina put on Celestina?
Nope.
Okay.
I don't know. I made that up because you know, I didn't research harmful herbs. But I knew that I wanted to use this method to get to her.
And we don't know whether it is contagious or anything like that, but it is just the sight of it that sort of gets her sent to this leper colony. The sight of the blotches or whatever they are.
It could have been a blotch. It didn't necessarily have to be leprosy. It could have been any number of herbal mixtures that gave her skin conditions.
Yeah, you say that in the book. You don't say it's leprosy. It's just that the señora sends her to a leper colony to work.
Right.
They don't know whether it's leprosy or not. They just want her out and sort of like, you know, isolated from all other humans. But
I'll tell you this. You'll find out in the third book what it is.
Okay.
Francis has a question. Could you speak to how it unfolded? Because there were some parts that were confusing, but I don't know if that's because we were reading it through Pola's eyes. And I'm not sure what she's referring to as being, the Phillippa storyline.
Yeah, because she kind of just like walks off with Don Tomas, and up until that point in the book, we are led to believe that Don Tomas might be a philanderer, but he doesn't do anything, you know, at the hacienda in front of his wife or there. And then the woman just walks off with him, but then she's like kind of like never the same. And it's like, I don't know, I feel like because we're watching it through Pola's eyes, Pola's very confused by it because she would never willingly go off with someone, but we also kind of, as the readers, don't really understand her motivation for showing up there that night.
Yes, Pola's confused by it. I did not go into great detail on it because Daughters of the Stone is all about that relationship. So we are looking at it from Pola's eyes. Pola's looking from the outside. When we get it from Fela's eyes, then we know why that happened.
Okay, that's on my to read list.
Okay.
TBR.
Renee asked, why was it important to have Simone and Pola become romantically involved?
I wanted Pola to be a complete human being. I wanted her to be totally healed. And that could not happen unless she established a loving relationship with another person. And also I wanted it to be a man because men had always been dangerous and harmful and negative forces in her life. And I wanted her to have a positive experience with him. And for me, that is definitely the manifestation of healing from rape is the ability to trust and be vulnerable to this man at the end of the book, right? So he's the antithesis of El Caballo or El Puerco or whoever, those men in the plantation, the first plantation, who were raping her. He is the antithesis of that. And he can feel that she's been hurt in this way. And so he makes sure, even when they come together and they know they're attracted to each other, he says to her, I will not move on unless you ask me to, right? I will respect what you need from me. It's also very important, and this I don't talk very much about, but it's also very important that she sees him nude and she sees him naked and unconscious. And she sees his genitals flaccid, which means that he can't hurt her, right? He is not aroused by her. He is just there, right? So had I continued with that scene, she might have gone up to him and kind of poked him and see what reaction she would get. But the reality is that until she saw him as someone who could not hurt her in any way, she would not trust him. So that was, that scene was very important. And I really thought about how to do that there.
Sarada has a question. I loved all the references to Yoruba religion and spirituality, Yemaya especially. Why was Yemaya chosen, was the chosen Orisha for Pola?
Yemaya is the mother. She is also the ruler of the seas, which is what brought her to this place. She's the all-powerful mother and protector. If you read my other books, every book will have another Orisha or goddess or god. So the first book, Daughters of the Stone, was Oshun, who is the goddess of sensuality and sexuality and all of that. Well, she's not going to be the goddess for Pola because sexuality is what got her into this mess to begin with. So Yemaya is a more appropriate selection for her because she needs protection and strength more than she needs sexual attraction.
Did you consider putting additional scenes around Orishas in the book? I mean, there's this one big scene where Pola is off and she's kind of despondent and Yemaya appears. Was there a thought of adding more throughout the book?
Well, there's the full-fledged appearance of her is when she needs her to help her save Chachita.
Right.
The other instances of Yemaya showing up are at the end of the book and at the, when she climbs the tree and she sees, those are the 3 times that she appears to her. I didn't want it to be just about those appearances. So she's with her all the time, but those are the times when she is the most pronounced in her life.
Tiffany asks, can you talk about the role of the forest I feel like it was its own character in the book.
Absolutely. Absolutely. The forest is where she feels freedom the most. It is also the natural world, and African religion is based on the natural world. The forest is exemplified by another Orisha, Osain, who will be the guiding Orisha for the third book. It is also where the tree is, and that tree offers shelter and a space, a safe space where things can happen, right? So that's where she meets Chachita. That's where when people are planning to escape, they do the planning in the forest. When people are trying to get together and have some private, romantic time, it's the forest. Whenever they want to get away from the oppression of the white characters, they sneak off into the forest. So it is a place of natural feelings of, it is the antithesis of the plantation. The plantation is the world of the white people, and the forest is the world where Black people can feel comfortable in nature.
I felt anxiety every time they were in the forest, especially after the couple runs away. And, they talk about how dangerous the forest is, and like there could be somebody 10 feet away from you, and you gotta I think there's that scene where Simone sort of covers Pola and holds her down, because she doesn't realize that like really close there are these sort of slave catchers. So like the forest kind of, anytime they went into the forest, even though they were escaping and somewhat free from the plantation, I also felt a lot of anxiety around the forest.
Right. And I felt that as enslaved people, you are never safe.
Yeah.
Right. So they were stealing a little bit of privacy. But the possibility of the militiamen being around. Now the militiamen come around when there's an escape attempt or something like that, or when they are going for a specific purpose. Otherwise, it's the overseers who would be looking after them. But when they realized that the overseers were busy getting drunk and that they would doze off, that's when people took advantage of going away. But I was, as a writer, very concerned about, am I making it too easy for them to get away? And so I had to have a scene where somebody gets caught there, and so that it's real. This danger is real.
You also talk about the slave hunters being both Black and white. Can you speak a little bit about like that whole dynamic, which feels like a book by itself?
Well, yes, there are Black, and I mean, it was a lucrative job, right? Catching slaves, it would get you well paid. And Romero is a biracial man himself. So that there is this element of self-hate, and the more vicious he could be to the enslaved people, the better he felt, because he's not them.
Yeah.
And he, he was in the first book and he was like that. He will be in the third book, and that will be resolved at that point. But yeah, go ahead.
It just felt like, I can't remember his name, but the seigneur of the whole plantation, it felt like he was completely exacerbated with Romero's behavior and how he almost killed Simone. It felt like that was going to lead to Romero's death.
Right. Romero comes close to being, well, in Daughters of the Stone, he was severely whipped, and later on he will get other punishment. But yes, Don Tomas, I had to pull out the section on Don Tomas. Don Tomas really, he thinks of himself as a playboy. He does not want to deal with all the issues on the plantation. He has to when his wife can no longer be in charge, but this is not something he enjoys. And even during that torture scene, he's pacing up and down saying, why are you making me do this? Why, you know, why, I don't want this to happen. And my point in putting that in there is the minute you decide that you're going to own another human being, now you've already lost your ability to be benevolent. Now you are an enemy. So I don't care how much you think that you're not as brutal as other plantations owners are. The minute you own another person and are forcing them to work for you at your behest, you've lost your humanity. You can't have it both ways.
Yeah, yeah. We got a few more questions. Crystal,
well, I'm glad.
Crystal George asked, last week in our discussion, we discussed language. What language are the characters speaking? Talk to us about their use of Spanish in the English version of the book.
They are speaking Spanish. It was very difficult to write a narrative in English about a world that exists in Spanish, which is why I was very happy to work on the translation into Spanish, because that is what was playing in my head when I was hearing this, and all the different levels of Spanish. So, you know, Don Tomás speaks one Spanish, but Rufina speaks another Spanish. Tia Josefa speaks another Spanish. All these people, because of class and because of the length of time that they've lived in Puerto Rico, have different levels of, how can I put this? Just like in the United States or in every other country, educated people speak one way. People who are not educated speak another way. People who are country people speak another way. So, but in terms of writing it in English, it was very difficult. I put in Spanish terms, but I made sure that there were context clues so that if you don't speak Spanish or you don't read Spanish, you could still understand what was happening in the scene from what was happening.
Yeah.
But I can't wait to read the whole thing in Spanish to see how that worked out. I mean, I have read it, but while we were working on it, I got to put it down for a few months and then come back.
One last question. Tell us more about the two small boys, spirit guides or Pola's imagination.
Well, I'll turn the question to you. What do you think? Are the two little boys real? Are they spirits? What do you think?
I think they were spirits. But I think in the book you call them spirits or something
All
like
the way at the end.
Yeah.
I didn't want to say that because some people haven't finished.
Oh, I'm sorry.
But yes, some people would call them guardian angels. Some people would say they're the spirit of the two babies that she lost, her two sons. Yes. And you notice that at the end they leave.
Yeah.
Their job is done.
Because they don't change, they don't grow.
That's right.
They sound the same height. Yeah.
They also don't speak.
They don't speak. So do we have any additional questions? If not, we'll wrap it up.
Someone said, Tiffany said, Romero disgusts me. He definitely is a disgusting human being.
Yeah, he's a sad person.
It was very hard for me to read. I won't call it a love scene, but the sex scene between him and Celestina was really tough for me to write. And I really didn't want to write it. And somebody said to me, oh, you're writing some freaky stuff. And I said, you know, do not confuse the author with the character. Those are two totally different things. But I needed to find a way to make these two characters either more objectionable, even more sicker. They have a very sick relationship. And I wanted to show that. And so now you got the two scenes out of me, that three scenes that made me most uncomfortable about writing it, but they were necessary. So
at first I thought it took me a second to realize that the marks that she was trying to hide from La Doña were the rash from the plants, because at first I thought they were the marks from her because he was hitting her so much.
Oh, that's a good observation. I never even thought of that one.
And I was like, oh no, wait, I was like, this is Rufino. But at first I thought that's what she was trying to hide.
Tiffany, you had something you wanted to say?
Oh, no, yeah, I hated Romero. So reading that scene didn't really bother me because I was like, he's trash. So he's gonna make love to this woman in a trash way. So I didn't care. I just got through that. Not love, but hooked up with her. But my other point was, it wasn't a question. It was just, I really enjoyed learning about the foods that the slaves ate because I think I mentioned this in one of the other book clubs. Like, we know generally what African-American slaves ate, but I don't really have context for what was eaten in the Caribbean. It just seemed like lots of tubers, and it said bean sauce. And I was like, that's really interesting.
Yeah, they ate what the white people would not eat. Right? So the parts of the pig that they didn't want, which is why another reason why herbs were so important to them, because these herbs made the inedible delicious. So if you're, for instance, cooking gandinga, which is a mixture of all the organs of this animal, well, that doesn't sound very appetizing, but you put these herbs in it, and now it smells great. And that's one of the reasons why it's one of the first things that Pola eats. And Pola is totally seduced by the food. I mean, she might have hated everything else, but that food tasted good to her. And so she was very happy to work in the kitchen. Please send me to the kitchen some more. She was just ready.
And also, I just want to add that we talked about mostly life on the plantation, but we didn't really speak about the Middle Passage. And I really enjoyed the way you brought that alive. I mean, it was horrible to read, but it was a necessary read.
Okay, thank you. Again, we always hear about Middle Passage, but we don't think about the details of that. What did that feel like being there?
Yeah. On that note, if there are no additional questions, this is actually our first repeat author. We read Daughters of the Stone a couple of years ago, and now A Woman of Endurance. So we thank you, just for contributing to this sort of larger literary narrative, whether it is focused on the Caribbean, Africa, enslaved Africans. I think that, both of your books and all of your future books that you continue on this subject will be really important to who we are as Black people, as Caribbean people. So just as people, because it's all part of the history of this hemisphere. So I definitely thank you.
I hope they do provide a dialogue that people can discuss this without getting accusatory and yelling and screaming at each other, because that gets us nowhere. We have to be able to have a conversation about what happened and why it happened and how we're going to keep it from happening again. And by saying, no, you can't teach this, that's not going to solve the problem. That's just going to make the scars even worse. So I'm glad every time I have a dialogue with someone about this, I'm just glad that I contributed to the conversation. And thank you so much for inviting me.
Thank you for joining us. If you have not read Daughters of the Stone, please pick that up, library, bookstore, wherever you use books or get books from.
Right. And the last thing I wanted to say, for people who do have people in their families who read in Spanish or speak Spanish, there's one reader that I have where she bought the Spanish book for her mother and the English book for her daughter, so that they could all as a family discuss the role of mothers in the book. And I just thought that was great. And another friend of mine who's a Puerto Rican and is bilingual, but she is more English dominant. She bought the Spanish version and the Spanish book, and she listens to the audio Spanish at the same time as she's reading it so that she can, you know, improve her vocabulary and her pronunciation and all of that. So people are finding all kinds of ways of using the books. And I'm just thankful that y'all are out there and reading.
One last quick question. Anna Marie asks, any chance you would consider writing a children's book?
I don't think so. I do have a collection of stories that can be used for middle grades, but to this point, nobody's really interested in publishing them. But if any of them get published individually in magazines, you're certainly welcome to use them with your classes. And I think the novels are more suited for like the upper level high school, 11th and 12th grade, because some of the scenes are really adult.
Oh yeah, no, I was thinking maybe if you could write towards, you know, that particular group, because it would help kids to learn that they have a history as well. You know,
Right.
Caribbean children.
And
children
what
of color.
grade, what ages were you thinking? Because there are other people who are doing that.
I was thinking anywhere between like 5 and 10, because we do
Okay,
have
so
some
children's
things
books.
written, you know, for middle school. but
There are
5
things written, and now that you mention it, I'm going to take a look and see, and maybe put it on my Facebook or my Instagram and give that information out to people who are interested.
That would be great.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much, Dahlma.
Okay.
Again, we really appreciate you spending an hour and a half with us. I want to thank Casita again for being a wonderful partner. And, you know, thank all of you who made this discussion possible. We appreciate your participation. We appreciate your, you know, purchasing books or even taking the books out of the library, whatever, you know, whatever you prefer. Supporting writers like Dahlma. Tomorrow, we actually start a new book because we don't want to give you one day off. So tomorrow we actually start the book, The Death of Vivek Oji. It is in the chat by Ekweke Amizi. So it's interesting enough that we read 2 of Dahlma's books, and Ekweke will also be the second author that we've read 2 of her books. So we read Freshwater about 3 years ago, and now we are reading The Death of Vivek Oji. We are partnering with Beyond Words Book Club, who they belonged with us, and now they went off on their own, started their own book club. So we appreciate that. We're always trying to support them. And an organization out of Nigeria called Lagos Live. They have a discussion group, and they will be joining us throughout the chat. I'll send you all, I've been sending emails giving you updates about it. It's going to be really interesting conversation. We're doing it on Zoom on Wednesdays, and we're actually meeting outside the DeWitt Clinton campus, the James Baldwin Farmers Market every Saturday. So if you can't make the Zoom, join us on Saturday, and we have free books when we meet in person. So you'll be able to get a book and join us. And there's also going to be a panel discussion. But again, if you're on our mailing list, we'll send you all that information. Thank you all once again for joining us. I thought your questions were great. Wherever you are in the world, please be safe. We want you back. If not tomorrow, for the next book and the following book, and so on and so forth. So thank you all very much.